A tough outlaw tries to rob a mysterious wagon, but when he pulls back the cover, he freezes up and totally changes his mind. Why? Hang on tight, 'cause this tale of old secrets, second chances, and a love that heals is gonna grab your heart. He tried to rob her wagon, but when he opened the veil, he froze and changed his mind. New Mexico Territory, late spring, 1876. Just past midday, the sun scorched the hard-packed red earth of the high desert, turning the air into waves of heat. Wind gusted through the flat land, dragging sand and swirling veils across the trail where 5 wagons rattled slowly between Sabu and Mesquite. Wheels creaked, horses sweated, and riders squinted beneath brimmed hats as a dust storm threatened to rise from the south. From a bluff above, Jesse Calhoun watched. He sat tall in the saddle, lean and silent, his eyes narrowed under a dusty black hat. 2 riders flanked him, Earl and Finch, both mean-eyed and eager. Behind them, tethered in a small canyon, were their horses and a small stash of stolen goods. Jesse raised a hand. The others halted, his gaze fixed on the 3rd wagon in line, different from the others. While the rest bore barrels, trunks, and sacks of grain or tools, this one was covered in white cloth, tight stretched, no markings, no dust, no drag, too clean. He clicked his tongue and his horse descended toward the road below. The moment the riders on the trail saw them, panic rippled like a gunshot. One man fumbled with a rifle, another yelled to the driver. "Hands down!" Jesse barked. "No one gets hurt if no one acts." Stupid. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Earl and Finch spread wide, flanking the rear and front of the wagon line. Pistols drawn, Jesse rode directly to the white-covered wagon, dismounted with a heavy bootstep, and climbed up without hesitation. He gripped the edge of the cloth and yanked it aside, then froze. Inside, the space was dim, the air thick with heat and dust. A woman sat cross-legged in the center of the wagon floor. Her skin was the color of sun-worn copper. Her hair was braided, tight, streaked with wind-dried strands. She cradled a swaddled infant against her chest, his eyes closed, lips parted in sleep. Around her neck hung a wooden pendant carved in the shape of a panther. Time had worn its edges smooth, but Jesse knew it instantly. He had not seen one in years, not since the Chiricahua dragged his half-dead body across a dry riverbed and hung a charm just like that above his fevered chest. His grip on the cloth loosened. The woman looked straight at him. "If you've come to steal," she said, her voice even, "at least look me in the eyes." Her tone didn't shake. Her hands didn't tremble. She didn't plead. She simply stared, waiting. Jesse felt something twist in his chest. "You're Apache?" he asked, the words catching low in his throat. The infant stirred, letting out a soft mewl, and the woman rocked him once, her eyes never leaving Jesse's face. His hand moved to the revolver at his hip, but did not draw it. She didn't reach for a weapon. She didn't scream. There was no fear, only recognition. And in that moment, Jesse saw not a mark, not a threat, not even a memory. He saw himself from a time when he'd been worth saving. A gust of wind tore through the wagons. Open side, the cloth fluttered, and the pendant around the woman's neck blew free, the cord slipping loose. The wooden panther hit the floor. Jesse didn't think. He stepped forward, bent down, picked it up with both hands as if it were made of glass. He turned it over once in his fingers, then gently reached out and placed it back where it had been against her chest near the child's cheek. No one outside moved. No one inside dared breathe. He looked down at her again, then stepped back, hopped down from the wagon, and pulled the cloth back into place without a word. Earl approached. What was in there? Jesse didn't look at him. He mounted his horse, turned its head toward the ridge, and said coldly, "Wrong wagon," and then he rode. The sun hung high and merciless as Jesse Calhoun rode away from the wagon train, dust curling behind his horse's hooves. The others followed at a distance, muttering, confused by his abrupt change of course. But Jesse heard none of it. His thoughts had gone years back to another stretch of desert, a different trail, and a version of himself not yet hardened into stone. He had been 20 then, cocky and desperate. On the run after a botched horse theft, he had crossed into Apache territory, thinking he could outride the law. He'd made it barely. 2 miles into their land before he took a bullet in the thigh and another across the ribs. He collapsed near a dry arroyo, mouth full of dust, blood leaking into the sand. When he awoke, it was to the heat of firelight and the tight sting of sinew binding his leg. Around him stood a circle of men with unreadable eyes, dark braids, and faces carved by sun and time. They should have killed him. Instead, they carried him back to a hidden camp nestled between canyon walls. For weeks, they said nothing to him, barely acknowledged his presence beyond feeding him, cleaning his wounds, and ensuring he could not run. He was not a guest nor a prisoner. He was simply there until he proved himself useful or proved he should die. First to speak to him more than a grunt was a girl named Nayeli, 17 at most, long black braid down her back, always barefoot, always watching. She never asked him what he had done, never told him what to do, but she showed him how to read animal tracks in dust, how to listen to birds to know who or what was nearby, how to touch the earth and feel the wind's direction before it turned. When he asked why she was helping him, she said simply, "You are not enemy. You are wounded. That is all." She never spoke English unless he asked her to. She insisted he learn their words, and he did. At first with grunts and gestures, then with halting phrases until her language became his own. She laughed when he got it wrong. She never corrected with anger. The others in the tribe remained distant, but they let him stay. They gave him tasks, tending to horses, gathering water, repairing arrows. Slowly, the edge in their eyes softened. Slowly. Jesse stopped counting the days since he'd been captured. He began to feel, if not like one of them, then at least like something other than a stray dog. But it never lasted. One morning, he woke to find his saddle returned to him, a water skin full, and a single carving placed on top. A wooden panther. It was a symbol of survival and quiet strength. Nayeli had carved it. He knew it without asking. When he looked up, she was watching from the edge of the trees. "Time for you to go," she said. "Why?" he asked. Her face did not change. "Because the world wants you to be who you were before, not who you are now." And so he left. He rode north, tried to find honest work, tried to sleep in barns and carry tools instead of weapons, but no one wanted a drifter with scars and no name. Doors closed, guns opened. And one winter night, after being chased out of a town for sleeping near the schoolhouse, he picked up a pistol again. From then on, he was Jesse Calhoun, the outlaw. Not the boy who once lived under red cliffs and learned to track deer barefoot. Not the man Nayeli believed he could become. Now atop his horse, his hands still tingled from touching that wooden pendant. It had been hers all along. He had no doubt. The lines of her face were sharper now, her cheeks leaner, but the fire in her eyes had not changed. She had not cried out when he tore the veil from the wagon. She had not begged for mercy. She had simply looked at him, not with fear, not even judgment, but recognition. As he reached the edge of the ridge, Jesse turned once in the saddle and looked back. The wagon with the white cloth stood still among the others. Sunlight caught the edges of the canvas, making it glow, and there, in the shadow of the flap, she stood holding her child, watching him go. She did not move. She did not wave, but somehow Jessie knew she expected him to come back. The night fell quietly over the desert, wrapping the earth in its cool embrace. Stars blinked alive one by one, scattered like salt across the deep black sky. The wind carried only the occasional coyote howl and the crackle of a lonesome fire. Jesse Calhoun crouched low in the scrub brush, 20 yards from the wagon, wrapped in white. His horse, tied far behind, him, remained still and silent. Jesse's breath came slow, measured. His fingers rested near the grip of his revolver, not for protection, only habit. He had followed them for hours after they left the main trail. The woman hadn't taken the group far. She set camp at the base of a mesa near a thin creek. No other riders, no guards, no hired guns. Just her and the child. A small cook. Fire burned low beneath a clay mound, giving off the faint scent of cornmeal and dried herbs. Jesse could see her stirring something in a pot. Slow, patient movements. The baby lay bundled nearby inside a basket lined with thick cloth and woven feathers. His small fists shifted with each soft sound he made. Jesse watched for a long time. The glow of the fire made her face look younger than he. Remembered, though her shoulders still carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many roads. He shifted once, and a twig cracked beneath his heel. She did not look up. "I know you're there," she said quietly without turning. "I knew the wind was different tonight." Jesse stepped into the light. His shadow stretched long behind him, and for a moment he felt like that same boy who once knelt beside a fire, hungry and broken. "They'll come back," he said, "for the wagon. They think you're hiding something." She ladled a scoop of the mush into a small wooden bowl, then set it aside to cool. "Are you one of them now?" she asked, her voice calm like she already knew the answer. Jesse's mouth twitched. He looked down away from her face. "I don't know what I am." Silence hung between them, soft as smoke. He baby let out a tiny hiccup, and she moved to check his blanket, her fingers sure and gentle. Jesse glanced toward the distant hills, then back at the flicker of her fire. Without a word, he turned and walked into the dark. Minutes later, she heard something, not footsteps, a sound closer to effort. She stood and stepped outside the glow of the fire. There, beside her tent flap, lay a neat bundle of mesquite and cedar tied with a strip of leather cord, dry kindling enough for 2 nights. No note, no sound of retreating boots, just the gift. She didn't smile, but her hands lingered on the bundle for a long time. She knew. She had known from the moment he pulled that cloth back, even in the weathered lines on his face and the dust caked in his beard. She recognized the same eyes, the same brokenness that once huddled beside her father's fire, bleeding and afraid. But back then he had still carried hope in the way he breathed. That night, as the baby slept against her side and the wind shifted, east, Nayeli did not whisper his name. She did not stir the embers to burn higher. He waited. The next evening he returned. She did not see him, but she saw the signs. The ashes from her morning fire had been swept away, buried beneath a fresh patch of sand. The wagon's wheel tracks had been smoothed. The trail leading from the road to her camp had been disturbed, covered with dried brush and scattered stones. Someone had gone through the effort of hiding her presence. Someone who once knew how to erase footprints. She walked the perimeter at sunrise, quiet, steady steps. She saw where his boots had pressed into soft soil near the creek, saw how they paused just a breath away from her wagon, and then turned back. He hadn't done it for honor, not for her, not entirely, but for something else, something that stirred in him like coals long buried under snow. He was not saving her. He was trying to save what was left of himself. That night, she built her fire a little higher and left a small bowl beside the flames with half her supper in it. She never looked to see if it was taken. She didn't need to. The firelight in the outlaw camp cracked and snapped like a warning. Dust swirled in restless gusts between the lean-tos and wagons, and the scent of scorched beans and old blood hung thick in the air. The men were drunk, most of them laughing too loud, playing cards with knives stabbed into the table like trophies. Jesse Calhoun sat apart, whittling a piece of pine into something, shapeless. His eyes, though, kept drifting east toward the horizon where the moon was starting to rise. Wade Morrow noticed. He always noticed. Wade was a tall man, wide in the shoulders, gray in the beard, with a kind of presence that turned men, obedient without ever drawing his pistol. Once years ago, he had pulled Jesse from a rope meant to hang him, cut him down in a dusty ghost town, spat blood on the lawman's boots, and offered Jesse a place at his side. "You're quiet," Wade said now, sliding onto the log beside him. "That's unusual." Jesse didn't look up. Just tired. Tired men don't clean their boots before they sit by the fire. "You walked back into camp without a speck of dust. That says careful." "Not tired." Jesse kept carving. His hand slowed. The blade caught slightly in the wood grain. Wade's voice dropped. "Lower! You froze, Jesse. First time I've seen your hand shake." Jesse's jaw tensed. There was nothing inside, just a woman and her kid. "Don't lie," Wade said sharply. "I've seen what you do when there's nothing. You don't hesitate. You burn wagons for less. You turned around because you saw something you didn't expect. Now I want to know what it was." Jesse tossed the carved scrap into the fire. It hissed once before vanishing. "You're not a priest," Wade said again. "You're my gun. I picked you out of the dirt, remember? I taught you how to shoot straight, how to survive. I gave you this life." "I know," Jesse said, finally looking at him, "and I repaid it." Wade stood, teeth bared like a wolf. "You repay it by doing what I say." He stepped closer, his boots grinding grit into the sand. "There's something in that wagon. Maybe not gold, maybe not silver, but something important. She's hiding it, and you know it. And if she's Apache, she could be running messages, harboring threats. That makes her a danger." Jesse stared into the fire, his voice quiet. "She's not a danger." "Then go back," Wade said. "End it quietly." Jesse shook his head. "No." The words settled between them like a dropped coin. Wade's expression changed. Not surprise, not rage, just something sharp, cold. "What did she do to you?" he asked. "Flash you a smile? Remind you of some little Apache girl who took pity on you back when you were bleeding in the sand?" Jesse stood slowly. "I'm done," he said. Wade struck him hard across the jaw. Jesse stumbled back, tasting blood. He didn't hit back. He straightened, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and met Wade's eyes. "I said, I'm done." Wade's fingers curled, but he didn't. "Reach for his gun. Not yet. Walk away from this," he said, "and you walk away from all of it. No more shelter. No more crew. You'll be alone again." "I've been alone the whole damn time," Jesse replied. He turned his back to the fire, to Wade, to the men watching from the shadows with half-drunk glares and twitching hands. His steps were slow, deliberate, not hurried. Wade didn't stop him because he didn't need to. The desert would do that for him. But Jesse knew better. The desert could kill a man. It could also burn away everything that was false, everything that had grown over his bones like rust, and in the ashes something else might. Rise, not the outlaw, not the priest, just a man who had made a choice. He didn't look back. The days passed slow under the New Mexico sun. Wind swept through the dry arroyos and carried the scent of sage across the valley. Jesse Calhoun stayed close, but never too close. His camp was just beyond the rise, half a mile from Naley's wagon. He never entered uninvited, never stepped beyond the ring of stones she'd placed around her fire. But he was always near. The first night she found a fresh rabbit, skinned, cleaned, and wrapped in cloth, laid neatly on a flat rock outside her tent. The next day, the broken wagon wheel she'd been struggling to fix was propped up, repaired with careful knots, and a new spoke carved from local mesquite. By the end of the week, a rough fence of juniper limbs encircled her small clearing. Not enough to stop a bullet, but enough to slow a wolf. He never said he was doing it, but she knew. One evening, when the wind was calm and the sky was soft with purple light, Nayeli called across the clearing as he passed. "Are you hungry?" Jesse paused. He didn't look at her at first, just at the sky, as if checking for signs of danger in the clouds. Then slowly, he walked forward and sat beside the fire. She ladled stew into 2 tin bowls, corn, rabbit, wild onion, no seasoning but salt. They ate in silence, listening to the wind rustle through dry brush. It was the first time Jesse had sat beside a fire with someone in years without keeping his hand near his gun. After a long while, Nayeli asked softly, "You remember our land?" Jesse nodded. "Every part. The stone that looked like a face, the river that only ran in spring, the taste of pine smoke in the mornings." She looked into the flames. "You stayed longer than most." "I never meant to leave," Jesse said. "But the world out there, it doesn't let you come back clean." Nayeli stirred the fire with a stick. "It never asks you to." They sat quietly after that. But the silence wasn't heavy. It was shared. Later, Jesse stood and walked to his saddlebag. From inside, he pulled a small object wrapped in leather. He crouched beside the infant, now sleeping, his tiny hands curled into fists, and unwrapped the gift. It was a carved eagle, smoothed by careful work, the wings arched as if just taking flight. He offered it to Nayeli. "For him," Jesse said, "so he remembers strength can be gentle too." She held it in her palm. Running her fingers along the wing, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Jesse gave a soft nod and stood. But just before he turned to go, she asked, "What was his name?" "The man you used to be." He paused, then looked over his shoulder. "He's learning to remember." And for the first time in years, Jesse smiled. Just a little but real. In the days that followed, the fire between them no longer burned with tension, but with warmth. They spoke more, shared stories, sat closer. Jesse no longer felt like a ghost haunting the edge of a life he couldn't touch. He was part of something again. And though neither of them said the word aloud, it hung in the air like wood smoke, familiar, fragile, and impossible to ignore. Dawn broke over the desert in a thin red line, casting long shadows across the sand. The morning air was still, too still. Birds had stopped singing. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Jesse stood by the wagon, his body stiff, his eyes fixed on the horizon. A rifle rested in his hands, steady, despite the tension in his jaw. The baby was quiet inside. Nayeli stood behind him, silent, her hand gripping the edge of the wagon frame. Dust curled on the trail. 3 riders approached, Wade Morrow at the front, his black hat low, a shotgun across. His lap. Flanking him were 2 others, men Jesse knew too well. Killers both loyal to Wade and just as mean. Wade pulled his horse to a stop 15 feet away. "Well, well," he drawled, spitting into the dust. "You look like a man standing in front of his own grave." Jesse didn't move. "You don't belong here." Wade's smile was cold. "Neither do you. You gave up everything for a woman and a brat." Jesse stepped forward just enough to make his meaning clear. "I gave up nothing. I finally found something that's worth bleeding for." The moment snapped. Gunfire erupted, fast, loud, close. Jesse dropped to one knee, aimed, fired. One of the riders toppled backward with a scream, his gun falling from his hand before he hit the ground. The second returned fire, grazing Jesse's side. Jesse spun, firing again. The man fell. Wade dismounted slowly, calm as ever, raising his shotgun. "You never learned when to quit," he said. Jesse raised his rifle again, but Wade fired first. The shot slammed into Jesse's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He crashed to the ground with a grunt, blood darkening his shirt. He struggled to rise. One hand pressed to the wound, teeth clenched in pain. Wade walked forward, cocking the shotgun again. "I should have let them hang you," he said. "Would have saved us all a hell of a lot of trouble." He raised the gun, aiming at Jesse's chest, and then hoofbeats. Fast, close. A sharp whistle cut through the air. Wade froze, glancing sideways just as 4 riders burst over the ridge. The sheriff, 3 deputies, guns drawn. "Drop it!" the sheriff barked. Wade turned toward them, eyes calculating. For a heartbeat, he considered firing anyway. Then he saw Nayeli step out of the wagon, holding her child in her arms. Her gaze was unflinching. No fear, just resolve. Wade snarled, tossed the shotgun to the ground, and raised his hands. The deputies dismounted and moved fast. One cuffed Wade. The others checked the fallen gunman. It was over in seconds. The sheriff knelt beside Jesse, who was struggling to sit upright. Blood, soaking the earth beneath him. "You all right, son?" Jesse coughed once, nodded. "Told you I'd send word if it got bad." "Yeah," the sheriff muttered. "You didn't say it'd be a war." Behind them, Nayeli dropped to her knees beside Jesse, gently cradling his head. "You're bleeding." "Too much," she whispered. Jesse's eyes fluttered. He reached up with his good hand, touched her cheek. "Didn't plan on dying today," he murmured. "But if I had to, this wouldn't be the worst way." "Stop talking like that," she said, voice thick. Jesse managed a faint smile. "You remember that fire we built?" "The first night I came back?" She nodded. That was the first warmth I'd felt in 7 years. His hand dropped. His eyes closed. But his chest still rose and fell faint, slow, but there. The sheriff touched Nayeli's shoulder. "Let's get him help." As the sun climbed, casting light over the blood-stained sand and broken trail, Nayeli held Jesse's hand and whispered, "You came back. You stayed. That's more than I ever asked." And Jesse, though unconscious, seemed to hear her, because the corners of his mouth curved just slightly, and the eagle carved from wood still hung beside the baby, wings lifted toward the dawn. The wind carried the scent of rain across the dry land, a whisper of life in a place once ruled by death. Days passed slowly after the shootout, long and quiet, marked by the rustle of brush and the low moan of pain. From inside the tent, Jesse lived, but just barely. For the first few nights, he drifted in and out of fever, his shoulder wrapped in cloth soaked with tinctures and steam. Nayeli never left his side. She crushed herbs the way her grandmother had taught her. She cooled his brow with river water, and when the pain was sharpest, she spoke in a patter, soft, and even like a prayer pulled from the bones of the desert. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was always her name. Nayeli, sometimes in sleep, sometimes in confusion, but always with reverence. And when the worst had passed, when the fever broke, and Jesse woke with eyes clear and breath steady, he found her sitting beside him, cradling her son in her arms, watching the fire like it was the last story left in the world. "You stayed," he rasped. She looked down at him, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "You did first," she said. By the end of the week, Jesse was strong enough to stand. By the end of 2, he was helping her stack stones for the foundation of a new shelter, not just a tent or a wagon, a home. They built it with their hands, rough timber, and patience. They planted herbs along the edges, a patch of sage, and a twist of mint. A wind catcher made of deer hide flapped in the breeze, tied with beads and bone, casting music into the air each morning. Nayeli began to smile again. Jesse began to laugh quietly, rarely, but when it happened, it felt like thunder rolling over a thirsty plain. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Jesse disappeared into the brush behind the ridge. When he returned, he held something wrapped in soft cloth. He waited until the moon rose high, until the fire crackled low and steady. Then he offered it to her. Inside the cloth was a bracelet carved from pale wood, smoothed and etched with a single word in careful Apache script. Nikana. It means the one I returned to. She read it aloud, her voice catching. You remembered? He nodded. I asked one of the old men in the village what the right word was. Took me weeks to carve it without splitting. She looked at him, searching his face. It means more than what you think, she whispered. It doesn't just mean the one I returned to. It means the place I never truly left. Jesse lowered his eyes. Then, I carved the right word. She took his hand and placed the bracelet gently around her wrist. It fit perfectly. The fire burned low. The baby stirred once in his sleep, then quieted again. Jesse turned toward her, his face half in shadow. If I could be anything again, he said slowly, voice rough but steady, I'd be the man you see when you look at me. Nayeli didn't speak. She reached out and took his hand, laid it gently against the center of her chest where her heart beat steady beneath bone and skin and memory. Then stay, she said, and be. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, his soul didn't run. It rested right there where the wind touched her hair, where the fire danced low, where a man who had nothing left finally found where he belonged. 1 year later, the wind still blew across the New Mexico plateau, but it no longer felt empty. Life had taken root in the red earth, quiet and slow like sagebrush rising from stone. The small homestead near the arroyo had grown. 2 cabins. Now, a chicken coop and a corral with a single stubborn mule. Jesse Calhoun no longer lived on the run. He walked the land like he belonged to it, like he'd never left. By morning, he taught Nahuel, Nayeli's son, now walking with sure steps, how to ride, a bareback pony, how to knot a lead rope, how to hold a bow without flinching. The boy watched him like the sun rose in his shadow. By afternoon, the sound of children's voices filled the clearing. Nayeli sat on a low stool under the cottonwood tree, reading aloud from a tattered book. Her voice flowed between English and Apache like water crossing stone, fluid and strong. Around her sat 6 children, some Apache, some settler, some with no bloodline but dust and wind. She taught them, all the same. And Jesse watched from a distance, leaning against the post he had carved himself. Sometimes he smiled, sometimes he just breathed. The townsfolk from farther down the valley began to call him the firekeeper. It started as a joke because his fire never went out. Always lit, always warm. But it stuck because he also mended fences, fixed wagon wheels, guided lost travelers through the canyon, and when the rains flooded the trail last spring, it was Jesse who led 5 people to safety with nothing but a rope and his voice. No one remembered the outlaw anymore. They remembered the man who stayed, the man who lit the path home. One evening, as the light stretched long across the plain and the air turned gold, Jesse sat beneath a wide Joshua tree. Nahuel lay beside him, head on Jesse's leg, holding the wooden eagle that had never left his side. Jesse stared out over the land, the hills, the smoke from distant fires, the shimmer of heat fading into cool air. His hat rested on one knee. His rifle was leaned against the tree but untouched. He didn't need it anymore. Footsteps whispered. Behind him, Nayeli. She crouched beside him, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Her fingers were warm, firm, the way they had always been. She looked at him, eyes soft but steady. You didn't change for me, she said quietly. you remembered who you were. Jesse's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, but a smile touched the edge of his mouth. "You're the only one who ever saw it," he said. They didn't speak after that, didn't need to. The wind moved through the branches above them, a hush-like breath across memory. The fire back at the cabin flickered, steady, familiar, in a land where so much had burned, something had survived. It wasn't just love, it was something older, something rooted, something that didn't need to be loud to last. As the last light slipped behind the distant ridge, Jesse laid a hand over Naeli's. The desert didn't need to roar anymore. It only needed to remember, and it did. "Hey, buddy, let's keep this tale rolling with the heartfelt wrap-up. Remember how one look can change everything? Here's the rest, straight from the heart, in that same friendly chat style. Thank you for riding with us through this story of redemption, memory, and the kind of love that does not demand change, but awakens truth." In the dust of New Mexico, under a sky both cruel and kind, Jesse Calhoun found not just a second chance, but a home in the eyes of the only woman who ever truly saw him. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe that even the hardest men can soften, that love can rise from ashes, and that some fires never go out, subscribe to Legends of the Wild West stories for more unforgettable journeys into the heart of the American frontier where bullets miss, but hearts never do. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a tale that lingers long after the dust settles.